Sit here, closer to me, my son, my daughter. Pull up a chair. Let's have a sip of imaginary coffee and chat a bit. You know, there are stories that seem too heavy to be told, and even heavier to be lived. Stories that drag on not for a day or a month, but for a lifetime. Today, I want to tell you one of those. The story of Mr. Arlindo and Mrs. Elza. A story about the weight of time and the lightness of a miracle that no one knew how or when it would arrive. Imagine a good man. A man who, in the prime of his life, had the steadiest hands in the neighborhood. Arlindo was a carpenter. From his hands came furniture that lasted generations, wooden toys that brought joy to children. His hands were his pride. They were the hands that held Elza at the altar, the hands that built the cradle of his first child. Strong hands, full of calluses and life, until the day life decided to test Arlindo's strength, not in his hands, but in his soul. It began subtly. A slight tremor in his right hand, which he thought was just tiredness. A spilled glass of water, a crooked line in a piece of furniture. But the tiredness didn't go away. The tremor intensified. The doctors gave complicated names. They prescribed medicines that brought more sleepiness than relief. And time, that clock that never stops, kept passing. 1 year, 5 years, 10. The tremor took over his other hand. It took over his arms. Arlindo's voice, once so firm, now wavered. The carpenter who erected beams could barely hold the trowel. And Elza, Donna Elza. She was the silent strength, the gentle rock where Arlindo's weakness rested. On the outside, she was all smiles and everything will be all right, my old man. But on the inside, how many nights did she spend in the kitchen with a dish towel over her face to stifle her tears, begging God to watch over them? 20 years. Arlindo's workshop fell silent, covered by a blanket of dust and longing. His children grew up, got married, and brought grandchildren. Grandchildren whom Arlindo loved with all his heart, but whom he could barely embrace properly, for fear that his trembling arms would frighten them. 30 years. The rocking chair on the porch became Arlindo's world. 40 years. Think about it, my friend. 40 years. It's the length of a desert. An entire generation. 40 years waking up and going to sleep with the same sentence. 40 years watching the world move by the window, while their own bodies were a prison. Faith? It was there, but it was tired. It was a worn-out faith, polished by tears like a river stone. They prayed for healing every single day. But after 40 years, prayer becomes almost a sigh, a routine. Medicine had given up. Friends, over time, became less frequent visitors. Only Arlindo and Elza remained, two hearts beating together in the same silent room, bound by pain and a love that stubbornly refused to die. The illness had become part of the house's furniture. It had become routine. The miracle seemed like a word from an old book, something that happened to others in other times. Time had cemented that illness in place. How do you uproot a root that has been embedded in the earth for 40 years? And the days, my son, the days dragged on like heavy clouds in a leaden sky. Think of patience. Not the patience of waiting in line at the bank, no. The patience of waiting 40 years for an answer that never comes. Have you ever felt that kind of weariness? That weariness that isn't of the body, but of the soul? That was Arlindo's daily companion. He watched his wife, Elza, aging beside him. He saw the wrinkles deepening around her eyes, wrinkles he knew were partly etched by worry. He saw her strength as she lifted him from bed, the tenderness as she adjusted his pillow, her firm voice reading Psalm 91 to him every night. And that, in a way, hurt more than the trembling. To see the love of his life bound by his illness. There were dark days. Days when rebellion knocked at the door. "Why, my God, I served you all my life. I was a righteous man. Why did you leave me like this?" He screamed inwardly because his voice barely came out, and the silence of the sky seemed deafening. How many times did he look at his own hands, now useless for work, and feel a dull rage? A rage at himself, at the illness, at fate. Elza also had her struggles. She was the anchor, but even anchors suffer in the storm. There were mornings when she would wake before sunrise, go to the backyard, and there, amidst the rose bushes she cultivated, she would break down. "Lord, give me strength. I can't bear to see my man suffer anymore. If it's not to heal him, take me, but don't let me see him like this." Her faith was tested in the fire, every single day. It was the faith that chose to love, even without understanding. Years transformed hope. The acute hope for a cure, for an immediate miracle, gradually subsided. It gave way to a gentle hope. The hope of having the strength for the next day. The hope of a day without so much pain. The hope that, in the end, God knew what he was doing. But the cure? The cure seemed like a locked door, the key to which God had lost. They grew accustomed to no. They grew accustomed to the pitying glances. They grew accustomed to a life confined to the balcony, the living room, the bedroom. 40 years is enough time for the abnormal to become normal. The tremor was no longer an intruder. It was an unwanted resident who had taken over the house. And faith, where does it fit into all of this? It stays quiet. It's in the small gestures, in the coffee that Elza patiently brewed and brought to Arlindo's lips, in the Lord's Prayer that they recited together before bed, their voices choked with emotion. It wasn't a faith of spectacular miracles. It was a faith of resilience, a faith that said, "I'm still here. Even broken, I still believe." Hope, you know? It also gets tired. And Arlindo and Elza's hope was at the end of its wick. What happens when that little light finally goes out? But that's where we're wrong, my friend. It's precisely when the wick is almost extinguished, releasing that last wisp of smoke, that the breath of God decides to appear. It didn't come like thunder. It didn't come in a dream with angels. It came in a radio static. It was a Thursday afternoon. It was raining outside. A fine, sad rain that pattered against the window pane, turning the world gray. Arlindo was in his armchair, listening to an old radio program. The announcer's voice was worn, and the radio hissed more than it spoke. Elza was in the kitchen. The clatter of pots and pans was the soundtrack of the house. In the middle of an old song, the announcer, in a measured voice, read a letter from a listener. And then he said a sentence, a simple sentence, not even the focus of the program. He said, "You know, my friend, sometimes God doesn't take us out of the storm. Sometimes He teaches us to walk on it. The secret is not to look at the size of the waves, but at who is holding your hand." That hit Arlindo in a different way. It wasn't a hallelujah. It wasn't a revelation. It was a discomfort. What did this man mean? Walking on the storm? He could barely walk to the bathroom. Looking at whom? He had been looking at God for 40 years, and all he saw were his trembling hands. He tried to push the thought away. It was just a silly radio phrase. But the phrase wouldn't leave. It stayed there, hammering away. Don't look at the waves. Look at the person holding your hand. That night, something changed. When Elza was about to read Psalm 91, he interrupted her, his voice faltering. Elza, not today. Read that part. About the sea. About Peter. Elza blinked, surprised. It had been years since he had asked for anything. She searched the Bible, its pages yellowed with age, and she read. She read about Peter leaving the boat, in the midst of the storm, and walking on the water toward Jesus. She read about how he began to sink the exact moment he took his eyes off the Master and looked at the force of the wind, at the waves. Arlindo closed his eyes. He felt no hope. He felt shame. 40 years, and he spent 40 years staring at the waves, staring at the trembling, at the illness, at what he had lost. He didn't say anything to Elza. He just stayed quiet. But something inside him, a gear that had been rusting for decades, clicked. A tiny click. That sentence was just a sentence. Was it? Or was it the first glimmer of light in a door that had been closed for 40 years? Even a seed that seems dead only needs a drop of water to show that it's still alive. The phrase on the radio was, the seed, the water. The water came in a way only God knows how. About 3 days passed. It was Sunday. Visiting day for his daughter, son-in-law, and grandson, 6-year-old Lucas. Lucas was an energetic boy, full of life. He was the noisy joy of that quiet house. Arlindo loved his grandson, but always with that painful distance, afraid of hurting him or not being able to hold him. While the adults chatted in the kitchen, the smell of Elza's cornbread wafting through the air, Lucas was in the living room with a notebook and a box of colored pencils. He drew with that creative fury that only children possess. After a while, he ran to his grandfather. "Grandpa! Grandpa! Look what I made!" Arlindo looked down. His hands, resting on the arms of the armchair, trembled. He saw the drawing. It was a simple child's drawing. A bunch of blue scribbles, which he understood to be the sea. A crooked boat in one corner. And in the middle of the blue scribbles, a stick figure standing. And another figure, larger, with open arms, waiting for him. Arlindo smiled at his grandson. But then, Lucas, with the innocent wisdom of children, pointed to the doll in the middle of the sea and said, "See, Grandpa? He's not scared. He's walking on the water, just like God." At that moment, my friend, time stood still for Arlindo. He looked at the drawing and heard the voice on the radio. "Don't look at the waves." He looked at the stick figure and heard Elza's voice reading about Pedro. One thing led to another. The radio, the Bible, the drawing. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a map, a whisper from God that was becoming clearer. For the first time in 40 years, Arlindo didn't think about his illness. He thought about Peter. He thought about Jesus. He felt something warm in his chest. Something he didn't even remember what it felt like anymore. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was courage. He looked at his grandson and, in a trembling voice, but with a firmness that surprised Elza, who was arriving from the kitchen, he said, "It's true, my son. He's not looking at the waves." Arlindo's faith, which had been just an ember covered in ashes for 40 years, suddenly received a breath of fresh air, and he felt, for the first time in decades, that something was about to happen. But what? What could it be after so much time? And it happened, folks. But not in the way someone might write in a movie script, not inside a crowded church, not with loud music. It happened on a simple sidewalk, on a dusty late afternoon, as the sun was setting. After that Sunday, Arlindo was different. Quieter, yes, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of resignation, it was the silence of waiting. A few days later, he looked at Elza and said something he hadn't said in 20 years. "Elza, put my chair outside, on the sidewalk. I want to see the street." Elza froze. "But, Arlindo, the dew, the wind, what if you—" "I need to, Elza." His voice was low, trembling, but there was an order there. "I need to see the sky without going through the window." With great effort, she helped him. She carried the old wicker chair to the sidewalk in front of their house. She sat Arlindo down there. He stood watching, seeing the children returning from school, the housewives with their shopping bags, the world that had moved on without him. Elza sat on a small stool beside him, her hands in her lap, nervous. That's when the man appeared. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a famous pastor. He was a simple man. Worn clothes, a face marked by the sun, perhaps a salesman, perhaps a wanderer. He came down the street slowly, carrying a small cloth bag. As he passed Arlindo, he stopped. He didn't look at Arlindo with pity. He looked with recognition. The man smiled, a kind smile, and said, "Good afternoon. You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" Arlindo, surprised, only stammered, 40 years. The man nodded, as if he understood perfectly. He didn't ask what was wrong with Arlindo. He didn't offer a diagnosis. He simply opened his cloth bag. Elza stiffened, ready to protect her husband. The man pulled a small glass bottle from inside the bag. Small, simple, a dark glass, like those old medicine bottles, with a cork stopper. Inside, a golden liquid. He held out the bottle toward Arlindo. "The doctor of doctors sent me to give you the medicine." Elza was about to say, "Sir, we've already tried everything." But the man continued, looking deep into Arlindo's eyes. "But pay attention. The remedy isn't in the bottle. The remedy is the word you've already heard. The bottle is just to remind you that the time for the word has come." The man placed the bottle in Arlindo's trembling hand. Arlindo's hands were shaking so much that the bottle almost fell. "Your wait is over, my friend," said the stranger. "Take possession." And just as he appeared, he turned his back and continued on his way, disappearing around the corner. Elza was pale. "Arlindo, what is this? Who was this man? This could be dangerous." Arlindo wasn't listening. He was staring at the bottle. The golden liquid looked like oil. Simple olive oil. But he didn't see oil. He saw the stick figure in the drawing. He heard the voice on the radio. "The remedy is the word that you have already heard." He understood. The remedy wasn't the oil. The remedy was faith. Act about the word. The remedy was to stop looking at the waves. With an effort that made his brow sweat, fighting against the violent trembling of his own muscles, Arlindo reached for the bottle with his other hand. He couldn't remove the cork. Elza tried to help. "No," he said forcefully. He closed his eyes. He didn't ask for healing. He said, "Lord, I am walking on water. I am looking only at you." The cork gave way. He didn't drink it. He, following an instinct that came from the depths of his soul, turned the small bottle upside down and poured a drop of that oil onto his two hands. The scent of olive rose. And then it happened. It wasn't slow. It was like a switch. The right hand stopped. The left hand stopped. Silence. a silence that Arlindo hadn't known for 40. He opened his eyes. He looked at his own hands. They were still, motionless, perfectly quiet. Elza let out a scream that was neither of pain nor of fear. It was a scream of astonishment. Arlindo slowly flexed his fingers. He closed his hand, opened it, closed it. The tears, which he hadn't cried in years, began to roll down his face. He looked at Elza, his face wet, a smile tearing at his soul. "Elza," he said, his voice still weak, but without the tremor. "It's over. Elza, it's over." And Arlindo de Carvalho, the carpenter, placed his hands firmly on the arms of the chair, and for the first time in decades, stood up on his own. Oh, my friends, what do we say after a story like that? Our hearts ache, don't they? 40 years of waiting. And the miracle didn't come in the form of an expensive medicine, nor from the hand of a famous doctor. It came on the sidewalk. It came from the hand of a stranger who carried a bottle of olive oil and a word. What does this story teach us, my son, my daughter? She teaches us that God's timing is not our timing. We want healing yesterday. We want the answer now. But God sometimes makes us wait. Not because He is evil, but because Arlindo's 40 years in the desert were not a punishment. They were a preparation. Arlindo's heart needed 40 years to be ready. Ready for what? Ready to stop looking at the illness and look to the God of healing. The radio, his grandson's drawing, those were the final adjustments. The strange thing? It was just the postman. The miracle cure wasn't the oil. The cure was faith that had finally matured. The faith that, upon hearing the word, did not doubt. How many of us today are waiting for a miracle? How long have you been waiting? 5 years? 10? Maybe 40? Are you asking for healing from an illness, the restoration of a marriage, the opportunity to find a job? And perhaps, like Arlindo, we are so focused on the size of our waves, on the tremor, the debt, the loneliness, that we are not hearing the signs. We are not seeing the remedy that God is already giving us in mysterious ways. Sometimes the remedy is a word from a friend. Sometimes it's a gesture from a stranger. Sometimes it's a peace you feel in the middle of the night saying, "Calm down, I'm in the boat." Don't disregard the small signs. Don't disregard the waiting time. God is working in silence. He is adjusting your heart. And at the right time, at the exact minute, the stranger will appear on your sidewalk, and your miracle will happen. And you? Tell me here, what's your story of waiting? What was the miracle cure that God gave you in a way you never imagined? Leave your story in the comments. Your story, your testimony, could be exactly the bottle of oil that someone else needs to find today to have their faith renewed. Let's transform these comments into a chain of hope. If this story about Mr. Arlindo touched your heart, if it reminded you that God doesn't forget anyone, leave your amen below. Leave a like so that this message reaches more weary hearts. And if you're not already part of our conversation, subscribe here to our little corner. That way, we can stay connected, sharing these soul-warming stories. May God be with you. And never ever stop looking to the one who walks on water.